These are the days of miracle and wonder.
Paul Simon sings this refrain in his 1980s pop hit, The Boy in the Bubble, with irony and disenchantment. But in this cut-up presentation, we will entertain the curious claim of a British painter named Benjamin Creme, a would-be modern-day John the Baptist, that despite all evidence to the contrary, these really are days of miracle and wonder, and we stand at the threshold of a new golden age. But before we get to apocalypse and messiahs, first things first.
If you are clinging to a certain belief or to a certain experience which you yourself had, and hold on to those, how is it possible to think together? These experiences, conclusions, beliefs will prevent you from exchange. So, if you will, kindly put aside all those, if you can, then we can meet each other. Because the speaker has no beliefs, no values, doesn't belong to any group or religion. He is not trying to do any kind of propaganda to persuade you to think in a particular direction or to convince you of what he is talking about. You must be very clear on this matter.
As Krishnamurti suggests here, we will try to approach Benjamin Creme's information with an open mind, but it might be worthwhile first to review briefly the nature of information itself. Information occupies a middle ground between fact and knowledge. It goes beyond fact, a public and recognizable observation.
Just the facts, ma'am.
Staccato signals of constant information.
Information is not the same as fact, given the possibility of misinformation and disinformation. Information is value added. It demands to be transmitted because its value is time sensitive. Its effectiveness has an expiration date. But it also falls short of knowledge, somewhere between fiction and science. Francis Bacon, father of the scientific method, anticipated information theory when he wrote of a contract of error between the deliverer and receiver of knowledge. The deliverer packages the knowledge in a form designed to produce belief rather than examination, and the receiver looks for instant gratification at the expense of careful thought. Now then, to make expectant inquiry into the curious case, Benjamin Creme's group's official website, share-international.org, dubs him a messenger of hope, and the painter-turned-messenger has written numerous books to disseminate his information. But the question we must ask is, what kind of hope? Is it genuine or fraudulent? Chief editor of the internationally distributed magazine Share International, for which he dictates a monthly article ghostwritten by a spiritual master, Benjamin Creme, pictured here in his studio in London, pursued a successful career as a painter in the modernist tradition before turning in his later years to modern mandalas, which express esoteric ideas about spiritual evolution of consciousness. And before becoming a self-styled modern-day John the Baptist. Here's the question: is Benjamin Creme more like John the Baptist, finger pointed up toward divine things to come? Or is he more like the sea discoverer of his own 1942 painting? Indeed, more like the medieval John Mandeville, who wrote of travels to marvelous and distant lands unknown to his European readers. Columbus read and perhaps carried his book with him on his first voyage to the New World. Well into the 16th century, Mandeville was revered as one of the greatest travelers in history, but over time it became apparent that he was a colossal fraud, having concocted far-fetched fantasies, and even these taken from other writers. When pressed on the meaning of his paintings, Picasso would say, "Do you understand the song of a bird?" to suggest that painting resists rational interpretation. Referring to this very sentiment of Picasso, the triangle-headed figure in Benjamin Creme's explanation of a bird points with one hand to the painting of a bird and upward with the other to simulate flight, as if performing a diversionary magic trick. Likewise, pointing upward, Da Vinci's John the Baptist looks out directly at the viewer, inviting our interpretation, even as his index finger stands for what isn't painted. But what is the viewer supposed to do? Return the gaze or look up? We will try to do both. I invoke John the Baptist and John Mandeville as possible models for explaining Benjamin Creme, in part because, as Francis Bacon observes, our anticipations or preconceived notions hinder our ability to grasp the new and strange. Sometimes we need to relate what is strange to the familiar through metaphors and comparisons. Perhaps, as Da Vinci's John the Baptist suggests, the very thing we anticipate would be thwarted by our prior expectations of it. As Alice Bailey writes, many religions expect or anticipate a savior. This is the hypothetical question Benjamin Creme's information demands of us.
You see,
Who's Goddo?
Goddo?
You took me for Goddo.
Oh, no, sir, not for an instant, sir.
Who is he?
Oh, he's a kind of acquaintance.
Nothing of the kind, we hardly know him.
True, we don't know him very well, but all the
Personally, I
same.
wouldn't know him myself if I saw him.
You took me for him.
Well, that's to say, you see, the dusk, the strain, waiting. I confess, I imagined for a second.
Waiting.
You have a message from Mr. Goddo.
Yes, sir.
He won't come this evening,
No, sir.
but he'll come tomorrow,
Yes, sir.
without fail.
Yes, sir.
We have to come back tomorrow
What for?
to wait for Goddo.
Ah, yes. He didn't come.
No.
Now it's too late.
Yes. Now it's night.
Let's go. We can't. Why not? We're waiting for Goddo.
curiouser and curiouser.
Meet Jerry Landers, just an average guy. Married, father of two.
Read this. God grants you an interview. It's a gag.
Pretty crazy gag.
Not what you expected, huh? Show 'em this.
Warner Brothers presents John Denver and George Burns in...
Oh, God.
I thought you didn't believe in me.
That's just an expression.
I'm more than that. I want you to spread the word. There I am. I exist.
And you think it's God?
Well, he thinks he's God, and I'm in no position to argue with him. I'm not a nut. Please.
What if it were you? What if you were given a chance,
Jerry,
to meet and speak
up here
with God?
Let's go for a ride.
What would it take to convince you it wasn't a joke?
Change the weather.
Little rain?
Yeah, a small shower.
One small shower, you got it.
It's not raining outside. It's just in here. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
Here it is, as seen through the eyes of Jerry Landers, God.
What would be the reaction of your friends and family?
You're gonna get God arrested.
We hit the papers, a little TV.
I'm liable to lose my job. Now, I am not crazy.
Well, God may have been interested in talking to you as an assistant manager. Now, we'll just see how he feels about you as a bag stuffer.
And I don't need some child psychiatrist to tell me that I didn't talk to God, because I did.
Lose a job, save a world.
And of all the people in the world, why would he...
I am not crazy.
...pick you?
Want to try a little harder to get the word out?
Well, yeah, I'll give it another shot.
That's my point.
Is this art imitating life, or did Benjamin Creme take his cue from Hollywood?
And told me that the masters were contacting me. And I said, no, they're not.
This is 44 years ago.
1958,
Yeah.
whatever that was. Yeah, late 58, so maybe November 58.
And they were saying that you were receiving messages.
He said I was receiving messages from the master. And I said, no, I'm not. I was quite unaware of it, totally unaware. He said, oh, yes, the messages come to you, but they just bounce off you. I said, why? He said, well, you're not open. I didn't know what that meant. I mean, it didn't mean I didn't believe it. I had read about the masters. I'd read all the theosophical teachings, the Alice Bailey teachings, and in there you can find out anything that is given out and known about the masters. So I knew that. I believed in the masters. I believed in their existence, but I had not the slightest inclination or expectation that they might contact me. You know, it didn't seem possible to me. But he said, yes, you're being contacted. And it'll come. Don't worry, it'll come. It'll settle down. And within a few weeks, on the 3rd of January 1959, the first message came through to me. And it was late at night, about 11:30. And it was as if a beam of energy or light had been focused at my head, and suddenly the feeling in my head changed completely. My attention was taken up several notches. My own thoughts disappeared, and into that pregnant space that was created, a voice as clearly as your voice over this few feet of floor space came into my mind, and it said, go to, if people know London, it was Blackfriars Bridge. Go to Blackfriars Bridge, south side, That's the Blackheath side, and they gave me a date, 9:30 p.m., 18th, and so it was about 3 weeks ahead. And when I went there, the time there was nobody around. It was late. It's a business area, and at night it's not populated. But there was a car waiting at the far end of the bridge, and in it were some people I didn't know, but one of them I did. One of them was the man who had come and told me I was receiving communications. And the thing just started from there. That voice, that master's voice, I didn't know which master, but I was told I could ask questions, but I felt too shy, actually, to ask. And I thought I knew. I was wrong, but I thought I knew who it would be, you know. And the voice told me to get a tape recorder. I got a little portable Grundig tape recorder. And he began to give me long dictations, which I just mouthed into the microphone. I had them in my head, and I just spoke them aloud as I heard them and recorded them. And then in about March, this went on for about 3 months, then in March, sometime in March, the master's voice said, well, switch off the machine and kneel down, which I did. And then I had this extraordinary experience. It was something unlike anything I'd done before. Tremendous energy poured down through the top of my head. I began to shake, and my heart melted, absolutely turned over. I was filled with the love of the whole world and everything in it. It was an extraordinary, wonderful feeling. And tears rolled down my cheeks, although I didn't feel sadness or pain or anything like that. It was just the heart reaction to this extraordinary energy. And I was given a vision. I was inside a great sphere of white light. And if I turned my head to the right, I could see all the events of the past which were taking place, row upon row upon row, behind and behind, way back, further back, further back, further back, in time, as it were. And I thought I could recognize certain battles and things and kings and queens and things that I saw as clearly as if they were still happening. They were still happening, moving. And if I turned my head to the left, I could see in the same way all the events of the future, which had yet to take place. I could see myself, I could see Maitreya, I could see thousands of people running about in the streets crying with joy and calling on Maitreya to speak to us. So, you know, they were absolutely overcome with this fact of Maitreya's presence in the world. And that is how the masters see time. I was given an illustration of the way the masters see time, which is non-existent for them. They see the past still happening, and they see the future happening before we think of it as happening, all as one. Like there's only now, this moment of time, and that moment of time includes all the past and all the future. And so they can tell the future because they can see it happening, you know? But it hasn't yet precipitated onto the physical plane. But it goes down through all the planes, and when it precipitates, we say such and such happened. But it's already happened in the timeless now, up there on a much higher level, and has come gradually down through the planes. And Maitreya can show an event, say 3 days before it takes place, to someone, and they see it and record it, phone me up and tell me what's happening. They saw it, and then 2 days later, it's in the newspapers, and so that event happened. It's happened. There is no such thing as time. We're going to have to realize that, and when we do realize that, we have a completely different view of what life is about.
Benjamin Creme's story of a telepathic message for a meeting on Blackfriars Bridge and the car waiting for him at the far end is like a scene from The Matrix.
This line is tapped, so I must be brief. they got to you first, but they've underestimated how important you are. If they knew what I know, you would probably be dead.
What are you talking about? What is happening to me?
You are the one, Neo. You see, you may have spent the last few years looking for me, but I've spent my entire life looking for you. Now, do you still want to meet?
Yes.
Then go to the Adams Street Bridge.
Get in.
We will return to Benjamin Creme's messianic visions, but we can understand them better in the context of apocalyptic thought more broadly, now and in the past.
This is in the apocalypse. Whoa, I'm waking up. I feel it in my bones.
Of love. And why is it that human beings who have lived for millennia upon millennia are living the way we are doing now? Confused, unhappy, miserable, uncertain, and outwardly in the world, as one observes, things are getting worse and worse and worse. The more you produce, the more we are using the things of the earth. We are destroying the earth.
I have felt it myself. The glitter of nuclear weapons. It is irresistible if you come to them as a scientist. To feel it's there in your hands, to release this energy that fuels the stars, to let it do your bidding, and to perform these miracles, to lift 1 million tons of rock into the sky. It is something that gives people an illusion of illimitable power, and it is in some ways responsible for all our troubles, I would say. This, what you might call technical arrogance that overcomes people when they see what they can do with their minds.
It was a dry wind, and it swept across the desert and curled into the circle of blue. And the dead sand falling on the children, the mothers and the fathers, and the automatic earth.
Because what's really happening is that you're hiding something out there. And it is going to send us back to the Stone Age. God help us all.
In 1954, we awakened something. Well,
There's nuclear tests in the Pacific. Not tests.
They were trying to kill it.
You have no idea what's coming.
But they were tests, and the monster was us.
In 1958, islands the Marshallese called home, the U.S. government would call ground zero.
3, 2, 1, fire.
"66 atomic bombs were detonated on the evacuated islands of Eniwetok and Bikini. The Cold War was hot, and America didn't need to seek approval from anyone, least of all the Marshallese. It was history's most massive atmospheric testing program, and one of the U.S. military's most remarkable public relations campaigns.
Well, now then, James, will you tell them that the United States government now wants to turn this great destructive force into something good for mankind? Something good for mankind. All right, is that all?
Convinced or coerced, hundreds of Marshallese were removed from their home islands, but not from harm's way. On March 1st, 1954, the world's largest hydrogen bomb cracked the sky above Bikini with a force twice as great as scientists had expected, showering the islands with radioactive fallout. Children played in it as if it were snow.
Since the time of the bomb, things have never been right with the children. I had my thyroid taken out. My son died of leukemia. He was 1 year old at the time of the bomb.
Michua and her husband John, like countless other islanders, were never warned about the bomb. At the time, John was mayor of Rongelap Atoll and among a small group of Marshallese who were later brought to the U.S. for radiation testing and a lesson in arrogance.
These are fishing people, savages by our standards. The Marshallese caught by fallout got 175 roentgens of radiation. Most humans are exposed to less than 20 roentgens in a lifetime. John, as we said, is a savage, but a happy, amenable savage.
For John Angine, these black and white memories have drained much of the color from his life.
There were many more problems after the bomb. The women are giving birth to children that are not like human beings. Those that survive have trouble growing and mental retardation as well.
Fraudulent Atoll, leased to the U.S. for the next 26 years. The Marshallese who once lived here have been moved to make way for the American military base. The lagoon where islanders once caught fish now catches incoming test missiles from California, 4,200 miles away. Part transplanted suburb, part country club, it's home to some 3,000 Americans, but off limits to the Marshallese. They're allowed to work here, but not to live.
On the right here we have the brand new youth center, just completed construction. On the one side it has a big dance floor, and on the other side games and so on and so forth.
From Kwajalein's manicured lawns and baseball parks, it's just 15 minutes across the lagoon to Ebi, home to many of the radiation exiles. Nearly 10,000 Marshallese jammed onto 78 acres of hot, treeless coral. Called the slum of the Pacific, it's among the most crowded places on Earth.
How many families are in some of these homes?
Oh, we're talking one room would be maybe 10 by 10, and you have 3 families.
Julian Ricklin is a local government worker.
There are children everywhere here.
Children everywhere. That's your body.
And you see children on garbage dumps. Why are they playing on the garbage
They're
dump?
using this as a playground because there's no playground on Ebi.
Stalking the children and adults here is a cluster of diseases from both the first and third world.
The apocalypse is already here for the Marshallese, but consider how obsessed we are in our cultural productions with the end of the world. What better story for the era of global warming than the original apocalypse, the flood?
No. What did he say?
He's going to destroy the world.
My
father said that one day, if man continued in his ways, the Creator would annihilate this world.
Can it not be averted?
He speaks to you. You must trust that he speaks in a way that you can understand.
I saw water. Death by water. And I saw new life. A great flood is coming. We build a vessel to survive the storm. We build an ark.
Mama! What is... Oh, them!
What do you want? You don't know your king. There isn't anything for you here.
I have men at my back, and you stand alone and defy me?
I'm not alone. It begins. When they come, they will be desperate, and there will be many.
Take the ark! I see how hard this was for you.
Remember, Noah, he chose you for a reason.
Is this the end of everything?
Beginning. Beginning of everything.
We're back to William Blake's "If you go on so, the result is so" formula for prophecy, but surely the question of the end or the beginning depends on perspective. The beginning for a privileged few, but the end for the many. Of course, one of the most cataclysmic ends would be nuclear. But whether it's with a bang or a whimper, there are many ways for the world to end.
Pushing through the market square, so many mothers crying. News had just come over. We had 5 years left to sighing. News guy wept when he told us Earth was really dying. Cried so much that his face was wet. Then I knew he was not lying.
This is Drew Pearson. We bring you this special radio television broadcast in order to give you the very latest information on an amazing phenomenon: the arrival of a spaceship in Washington. The Army has taken every precaution to meet any emergency which may develop. Just a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, I think something is happening.
I came here to give you these facts. But if you threaten to extend your violence, this earth of yours will be reduced to a burned-out cinder.
It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine.
From Paul Kingsnorth's defeatist reaching for the whiskey bottle to the panel on climate change's SOS.
I'll send an SOS to the world. I'll send an SOS to the world. I hope that someone gets mine. I hope that someone gets mine. I hope that someone gets my message in a bottle, yeah. Message in a bottle.
And calve into the sea.
Then the next thing is, okay, how fast is it melting, and how quickly would that contribute to sea level rise? Right. Climate change has outpaced the worst case scenarios that was observed 20 years ago. And so it's just melting as fast as it can here.
If all of Greenland melts, how much would the ocean rise?
Well, Greenland contains about 7 meters or 21 feet of global sea level equivalent.
21 feet.
Yeah.
So if it melted, 21 feet. So just to be clear on what that means, if all of Greenland's ice melts, which is now being argued as a distinct scientific possibility, then 80 of the world's 100 biggest cities would be underwater. To illustrate his point, Dr. Box took us to see what sea level rise looks like in real time.
Now we're heading to the ice front where it's calving. Here's where the ice is going really fast, like several kilometers per year. And this is like kind of like a sports car glacier because it's very steep and it's just shoving a lot of ice into the sea.
It looks like the Palace of Jor-El.
Yeah.
Superman threw his Krypton in there and it...
Yeah, it became the Fortress of Solitude.
Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. That is wild. That's amazing. Holy shit. Yeah, that whole front is going to come off there. Go. There it goes. There it goes. Holy fuck. Whoa. Look at how much the water is.
Yeah, that's it, man. An apartment building just fell over.
Wow.
A lot of this water that's bubbling up at the front, that's another part of the story, because that turbulent water is forcing a heat exchange between this warm ocean and the cold ice.
Right.
So that mixing that's actually forced by meltwater, squirting out at depth, and then it rises because the fresh water's lighter. It's undercutting it and promoting calving.
One thing that's hard to describe about what's happening in Greenland is the scale of it all. For example, these ice cliffs are hundreds and hundreds of feet high, and they are continually calving into the sea.
Look at that. That's crazy. Wow, look at that.
Dr. Boggs suggested we set up camp next to the glacier to witness just how fast it's breaking apart. So it sounds like there's a thunderstorm going on right now, but it's odd because it's not coming from the sky, it's coming from below us. Literally whole mountains, thousands of tons of ice are just falling into the sea or the fjord as we are talking by the fire about climate change. It's pretty sobering. It scares the piss out of me, quite frankly.
If you look at the latest data, we're 60 years ahead of the worst case scenario. That worst case scenario is staggering. So what happens if 80 years from now, we're 60 years ahead of those worst case scenarios like we are today? Then we're in a catastrophic situation.
Well, that seems likely because the trajectory that we're on right now is toward climate catastrophe. There does reach a point where it becomes unmanageable.
Now, the worst case scenarios Dr. Box and I were talking about were based on the recently released Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC's, 5th report, which concludes that we have dramatically exceeded our previous worst case scenarios.
I'm on the phone with Jim on one of our regular check-ins. Like, Jim, nothing's happening.
Hey, Jim. It's going well. We had some serious bouts of wind, but other than that, things are fairly well set up here. We've got some continuous time lapse going.
It's starting, Adam. I think. Adam, it's starting.
Oh wait, Jim, this is the big piece is starting to cast. Let me call you back.
Call him back.
Okay, bye.
Still going? Yeah. In that V section right there. Holy shit, look at that big bird rolling. All four running, right?
Yeah. Look at that. You see how, look at the whole thing.
Is 300, sometimes 400 feet tall. Pieces of ice were shooting up out of the ocean 600 feet and then falling. The only way that you can really try to put it into scale with human reference is if you imagine Manhattan. And all of a sudden, all of those buildings just start to rumble and quake and peel off and just fall over and roll around. This whole massive city just breaking apart in front of your eyes. We're just observers, these two little dots on the side of the mountain. And we watched and recorded the largest witness calving event ever caught on tape.
So how big was this calving event that we just looked at? We'll resort to some illustrations again to give you a sense of scale. It's as if the entire lower tip of Manhattan broke off, except that the thickness, the height of it, is equivalent to buildings that are 2.5 or 3 times higher than they are. That's a magical, miraculous, horrible, scary thing. I don't know that anybody's really seen the miracle and horror of that. It took 100 years for it to retreat 8 miles from 1900 to 2000. From 2000 to 2010, it retreated 9 miles. So in 10 years, it retreated more than it had in the previous 100.
The Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets are these giant domes of ice that preserve climate records very much like tree rings. Snow is added to the top, turns into ice, and ice core scientists can drill holes through the ice sheets and pull out a core and examine not only the ice, but also bubbles of ancient air that are trapped in the ice. By looking at the chemistry of the ice, we can learn about past temperature, and by looking at the air, we can actually measure the carbon dioxide content. And one of the things that we learn is that past temperature and carbon dioxide vary together. They go up together, they go down together. And over the last 800,000 years or so, atmospheric carbon dioxide was never higher than about 280 parts per million, until we started adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And now it's about 390 parts per million. And that's about 40% higher than it was when carbon dioxide was only varying for natural reasons. But now we're headed for 500 parts per million or more.
Since we made this animation, we've now broken 400 parts per million in carbon dioxide. We have very strong data that this greenhouse gas effect is what is causing the changes that the scientists are observing around the planet. If you actually study all the peer-reviewed literature over the last 23 years that say anything about global warming, 0.1% of them deny that humans are causing global warming. I wanted to share with you some of the organizations that support the statement that humans are causing this round of climate change that we're seeing now. It starts off with the U.S. Climate Change Science Program that was created by President Bush, and the U.S. National Academy of Science, and in fact, every major scientific organization who has members that include climate scientists, the experts that are studying this field, all say that man-made climate change is happening. The Pentagon, Walmart, Duke Energy, and even American Electric Power, the Pope, the Dalai Lama, and every major religious denomination that has a statement about climate change has acknowledged that man-made climate change is happening. We hope that you consider all of these facts and all of these different groups with their incredible reputations when you think about your stance on climate change and what we need to do for the future.
And another message in a bottle, this time from the year 2093.
What would be your elevator pitch to explain human-caused global warming? Imagine you get in an elevator.
Yeah, sure. No, I know what an elevator pitch is. I've met Elton Sherwin, who's the man who invented that phrase.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's simple. It's basic physics and chemistry. It's physics and chemistry that we have known since the 19th century. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. That means that it's relatively transparent to visible light, but relatively opaque to infrared. Or make it even simpler, light comes in, heat gets trapped. So if you put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, more heat gets trapped. And sooner or later, the Earth has to warm up. That's basic physics, and there isn't really any other possibility. And if you read the work that scientists were writing, say back in the 1950s and even 40s and 30s when they first started worrying about this, this is what almost all of them said. Almost all of them said, well, we don't know for sure when this will happen, but sooner or later.
Researchers say increasingly large amounts of CO2 are accumulating in the atmosphere. They fear the Earth will gradually become warmer, causing as yet uncertain but possibly disruptive changes in the Earth's climate 50 to 70 years from now.
The Earth has got to warm up. And guess what? That sooner or later has passed, right? And here we are.
You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Piketty's graph traces the high income inequality in the US in the Gilded Age of the 1920s through the relative egalitarianism between 1950 and 1980 to the explosion of inequality after 1980 and the steep and rapid upward trajectory of the present. If this pace continues, the upper 1% will be raking in 60% of national income in the US by 2030.
Alike, because we are seeing not only great disparities in income and wealth, but we're seeing them get entrenched. We're seeing them become inequalities that will be transferred across generations. We are becoming very much the kind of society we imagine we're nothing like.
Here's Piketty's main point. Capital tends to produce real returns of 4 to 5%, and economic growth is much slower. What's the practical result of that?
What that means is that if you have a large fortune, suppose that our family has a large fortune, they can, the inheritors of that large fortune, can live very, very well. They can live extraordinary standard of living and still put a large fraction of the income from that fortune aside, and the fortune will grow faster than the economy. So the big dynastic fortunes tend to take an ever-growing share of total national wealth. So when you have a situation where the returns on capital are pretty high and the growth rate of the economy is not that high, you have a situation in which not only can people live well off inherited wealth, but they can actually pass on to the next generation even more, an even higher share. So it's all, in his terms, R, the rate of return on capital, and G, the rate of growth of the economy. And when you have a high R, low G economy, which is what we now have, then you're talking about a situation in which dynasties come increasingly to dominate the top of the economic spectrum. And a tiny fraction of the population ends up very dominant.
What's the realistic impact of this on working people?
There's a direct impact, which is that part of income is always going to go to labor, although that seems to be a diminishing fraction, but the part that comes from capital is going to be in the hands of a very few people. The other thing, which I think is critically important, and he talks about more towards the end of the book, is the political economy. That when you have, what Teddy Roosevelt could have told you and did, that when you have a few people who are so wealthy that they can effectively buy the political system is going to tend to serve their interests. And that is going to reinforce this shift of income and wealth towards the top.
Do you agree with him that we are drifting toward oligarchy?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't think that's even, I don't see that there's any question of it. If you look at certainly if you look at what we know already, and we're learning more, we know already about the concentration of income, of wealth, you can see that it is growing. You can see that, and you can actually see, I spent a little while just sort of going through the Forbes 400 list. And what you find is already, there's an awful lot of inherited wealth in there. It's no longer a list of self-made men. And of the self-made men, a lot of them are pretty elderly. And those fortunes are going to be passed on to next generation. So no, the drift towards oligarchy is very visible, both casual observation and in the numbers.
I was
are working hard in their daily jobs.
And back to another Forbes list for another point of Piketty's, that the richest aren't just self-made entrepreneurs.
What you see actually in the data is not only entrepreneur, you also see a growing part of inherited wealth, which grows almost as fast as entrepreneurial wealth. Right now in this country, the bottom 50% of the population owns 2% of national wealth. Even if you don't want to go all the way to socialism, maybe it's possible to do a bit better than that.
Better than the current inequality, and, says Piketty, the worse inequality to come.
There's no natural force that guarantees that this will stop somewhere that is, acceptable and compatible with our democratic institution.
A loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires and baby. These are the days of miracle and wonder. This is the long distance call.
The failure of capitalism is what some blame for the current global economic crisis. But is it as simple as that? And what are the alternatives? Europe has been hit especially hard by the recession, prompting many to wonder if free markets can coexist alongside the welfare state. The collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s ended not only the Cold War, but also dismantled the most visible representation of global socialism. Capitalism became the buzzword, with Russia and Eastern Europe spending a chaotic decade shifting to free market mentality. But some progressive European thinkers say the capitalist model is unsustainable, one that exacerbates divisions between the rich and poor. Governments are now slashing social programs to stay afloat, provoking a public outcry against cuts to what many consider an essential social safety net. So today we ask, if capitalism is indeed failing, what are the alternatives? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email to the show. Well, my guest today says we're approaching an apocalyptic doomsday that doesn't end with the global financial crisis. Slavoj Žižek has taken on many roles: philosopher, psychoanalyst, cultural theorist, and professor. His latest book is titled Living in the End Times, and in it he argues that we are in denial about almost everything from looming environmental disasters to biogenetics and social divisions. Professor, great to have you on the show. Very honored.
I'm also honored. Thank you very much.
Well, sir, just to get a broad idea on what you wanted to touch on in this book, you talk about a number of key areas of apocalyptic crisis, so I want to touch on these, throughout the show, but you talk about environment, the economy, social imbalance, and biogenetics. So let me ask you, why pick these particular areas, economic crisis, environment, social imbalance, and biogenetics?
I asked myself a very simple question. You remember 20 years ago when Francis Fukuyama presented his thesis on the end of history, people were making fun at him. Oh, that guy who thinks the history is over. But most of the people today, even most of the left, are Fukuyamaists. They really think that liberal democratic capitalism is our destiny. All we can do is make it a little bit more tolerant, a little bit more welfare state, and so on. And I asked myself a very simple question. Are there still, in today's global society, antagonisms, problems, which, the way I see it, I doubt that they can be resolved or even kept in check within this liberal democratic global capitalist frame. First, I see ecology, for obvious reasons. I know you can cope with ecology through market means at a local level by changing the taxing system, but not when you face great catastrophes. Then it's biogenetics. I think this is an unheard of domain of possible manipulations. Market cannot regulate it, not even state, I think. Then the new divisions, new forms of apartheid. There are already 1 billion people today on the earth living in slums. And finally, the inner logic of capitalism itself. Let's be frank. I think so-called intellectual property inherently doesn't function. There is something in it which resists being reduced to private property. And again, I'm not a cheap apocalyptic guy. I'm not saying 2012 or whenever there will be a catastrophe. Right. Let's be patient. No reason to lose nerves. Let's just be aware that we are dealing with a series of very serious problems which, if we just leave the existing society to develop following its inherent tendencies, will eventually lead to some kind of zero-level catastrophic point.
All right. Well, Professor, I'm going to go through some of the areas you touched on there. Let's start with economics and look at the economics of things. First of all, are we seeing basically the collapse of capitalism? And do you feel somewhat vindicated in your views by watching the global economy, crushing itself, and the foreclosures on properties, the bailouts and all this? Is this basically a vindicating situation for you?
No. Unfortunately, listen, I may still be a kind of a Marxist, but I'm very realist. I don't have these dreams, revolution is around the corner and so on. Absolutely not. I think it will, the present crisis will just make capitalism leaner and meaner in the long term. But there is another thing happening with today's capitalism which should worry every honest freedom lover much more than this. Countries like China and so on, all that we so poetically like to call capitalism with Asian values. What does this mean, their explosive growth? Till now, let's be clear, there was one good argument for capitalism. Sooner or later, after periods of dictatorship, 10, 20 years, capitalism always engendered a drive towards democracy. Now, I think it's no longer the case. I don't see any inherent tendency in countries like China or a softer version, Singapore, towards democracy, at least the way we understand it.
Professor?
In other words, we are approaching, sorry, just this, a situation where we have capitalism which is more efficient than Western liberal capitalism and which inherently no longer needs democracy.
What I wonder, Professor, I want to ask you about this issue of climate change and the fear factor that's generated around it. Let's get your perspective on where you think climate change really is and perhaps how we are mishandling the information.
Well, first I would like to describe in very simple terms a mechanism which in psychoanalysis is called disavowal, usually exemplified by the phrase, I know very well, but. Isn't it the way we really relate to the climate change is that we know rationally we are approaching a catastrophe, but we somehow in our guts cannot really accept it that it will happen. It's a very strange mechanism, and I think that at a more radical level even, you know, the problem with climate change, I think, is that, again, it cannot be resolved at the moral and legal level. Just, this is for me the problem with President Obama's, whom I appreciate very much, with President Obama's reaction to here in the States to the Louisiana coast oil spill. He treated it as simply another issue of locating, finding the culprit, punishing it, and so on and so on. For me, the problem is not BP, British Petroleum. It might have happened to another company, probably. The problem is a more global one, our way of life. How are we going to get ready for big changes ahead of us? Imagine, remember the Iceland volcanic ash, which interrupted travel around Europe. Imagine just 2-3 times stronger explosion, which may have rendered the whole Iceland, the whole state, uninhabitable. Where will people move? How will this be organized? And so on and so on. There are enormous challenges today, and it's ridiculous to think that we can solve them in this immediate, legal, moralistic way, find the culprits, and so on and so on. It's not a question of this, it's the question of changing the basic parameters of the system in the long term.
Professor, is it a...
I think my solution is a very simple one. There is something missing in this equation. Liberal center, populist, anti-immigrant, racist right. Only a new left can allow us to break out of this deadlock. Will it? I'm not sure. But you know what's the good news when you mention this? Listen, we are dealing here with a lot of ideology. One should never forget that neoliberalism is not economic practice. It's an ideology. The countries which proclaim to be pro-liberal are all the time breaking the rules. So let me report on a text that I read now, an excellent one, which takes Scandinavian countries and establishes that first, they are still far more egalitarian than anywhere else in the world. Like in Norway, the usual gap in a company between lowest and highest paid is 1 to 4. You still have health care, social security, and so on. But now comes the surprise. At the same time, these countries are on the top, immediately after Singapore and Hong Kong, of the competitiveness on the market. Here you have a clear empirical proof how more egalitarian spirit, social welfare, and so on, do not necessarily endanger competitivity.
So, Professor, with just literally 20 seconds to go, I want to get your perspective on the future. Is it ultimately light or dark? Do you see things getting better or getting worse?
Well, as a philosopher, I will give you an apparently contradictory answer. There is light, but the only way to light is through courageously confronting darkness.
For the wretched of the earth, reality is apocalypse. Decades ago, Frantz Fanon wrote of the shrunken bellies that outline what has been called the geography of hunger, It is an underdeveloped world, a world inhuman in its poverty. Europe is literally a creation of the Third World. The wealth which smothers her is that which was stolen from the underdeveloped peoples.
Because Shabunda's hospital has been all but destroyed, we met Nurse Augustine Umbula at the building he calls the Nutrition Center. He and his staff have worked without pay since 1994. Many children here are dying of malaria and tuberculosis. But Mr. Umbula says there's nothing he can do about that. What can I do, he says. I have no medicine, none at all. Today's food delivery will at least let him do something about his most pervasive problem, malnutrition. Remember, no outside food has reached Shabunda for 3 months. He says the most vulnerable are the infants. Up to the age of 2, children's immune systems are still developing. Infants require many more calories for their size than adults. The combination of malnutrition and weakened immune systems is deadly. The children of Rwandan refugees are in the worst physical condition, he says. They've had to walk more than 100 miles, spent months in the rainforest where it is virtually impossible to give a child enough nutrition, where the water carries all kinds of diseases.
We were displaced in the forest, and in the forest there is no food. There are so many problems.
One child seemed to be in worse shape than all the others. Mr. Umbula told us that he was born in the rainforest and had spent most of his life there. He guessed his age to be about 3 years old. This child has tuberculosis. Mr. Umbula says he might not have been so susceptible to the disease had he had the proper nutrition. Shabunda lies in one of Congo's richest agricultural areas and shouldn't need to depend on aid flights. But the constant war has made it impossible for people to work in the fields. We cannot grow our own food, we cannot move freely. Even here in Shabunda, we used to hear about famine, but right now we can see there really is a famine. This one aid flight can only help for a while. There will be more fighting and more children will die in the rainforest. These are the survivors, the lucky ones.
This antique locomotive was brought here to Africa almost exactly 100 years ago, back in 1902. The name of the town then was Stanleyville, and the entire Congo was the preserve of just one man, King Leopold II of Belgium. Much of what exists in Congo today is a direct or indirect consequence of what he did back then.
No time now for history lessons. The detailed story is brilliantly captured in the book King Leopold's Ghost. Suffice it to say that over a 30-year period from about 1880 to 1910, agents acting in behalf of the Belgian king whipped, shot, and hung, maimed and starved, but mostly worked an estimated 10 million Congolese to death. Hardly anyone noticed the loss of a few million Congolese back then, either. In those days, the Belgians were shipping ivory and rubber back home as fast as they could steal it. In more recent years, when dealers assemble in the Belgian diamond capital of Antwerp, a significant part of the inventory has come from Kisangani. Balance and endurance. In Greek mythology, a man is doomed to push a rock endlessly up a hill. In the Congo, it is the women more often than not. The women struggling their way up the hill, step by painful step. 200 pounds of beans carried mostly uphill for more than 2 miles. Msavumba is hoping that she'll be paid $1. But there are no guarantees in her line of work. When she reaches her destination, she gets 40 cents. She will tell us later that she feels cheated, but there is, of course, nothing she can do about it. With only 65 cents in hand, Msavumba has to ration herself carefully. She spends 35 cents on cassava flour for the next morning's porridge. The rest of the money buys that night's dinner. 10 cents for a handful of minnows. 6 cents for some vegetables and salt. 5 cents for firewood to cook. As Msavumba returns home to prepare dinner, she has 9 cents left. The children sit quietly outside while their mother cooks. Msavumba delays dinner until it is almost sundown. She knows that if she feeds the children too soon, they'll be hungry again before bedtime, and the little ones will cry. They have survived starvation, disease, and an assortment of soldiers from different armies in the jungle. There were times there when they couldn't light a fire for fear that the smoke would draw some of those soldiers. Life here is actually better than for millions of other Congolese. School is $3 a month per child, and Msavumba manages to scrape enough money together to send some of the older children. The middle ones watch the younger ones during the day. It's amazing, really. They have just enough to scrape by, and yet there's very little complaining. One of the girls has bought some palm oil at the market. She hands it to her mother, explaining that she didn't buy it from the regular seller. She got the oil somewhere else. It accounts for the last 9 cents that Msavumba earned on this day. She's a little annoyed, telling her daughter that she would have received more oil for the money from the regular seller. They have survived another day. There will be cassava porridge in the morning, and then it all begins again. And how is it that Robert Sussman, an orthopedic surgeon from Baltimore, drawn here to the Congo to treat those injured and wounded by war, how is it that he now finds himself doing business with a Congolese partner while also delivering food to villages which charitable agencies ignore?
That little round tummy is not from getting too much to eat, but having a diet that contains next to no protein.
But I mean, even his little cheeks, look at him. He's got a cute little round face, right?
And some of that is edema, fluid, from, again, not having adequate protein in the system.
The odds against these children are staggering. They'll be lucky to escape with stunted growth and mental retardation.
Yeah, as you'll see and hear, many of these kids have chronic cough, chronic otitis, conjunctivitis, and their immune system is absolutely challenged to the max. Hence, if they were to contract a disease such as measles, many of them would die.
Here's one you don't hear often. These people are suffering from an excess of their own generosity. Dr. Sussman delivered enough food here to last the 20-some children in this village about a month. The adults only give the food to the children. But they also invited roughly 100 starving children from surrounding villages to share the food, so it was gone in a matter of days.
Not that everyone is malnourished or poor. In nearby Bukavu, the well-to-do are playing tennis at the club. Some civilians are making a lot of money. Private mansions are sprouting like mushrooms on a hillside that was once a closed government compound. There are vast fortunes to be made in the Congo, and behind the walls of this well-secured compound, Dr. Sussman from Baltimore and his Congolese partner are prepared to do business with the traders waiting outside. Don't misunderstand, their humanitarian work is real and legitimate, but it's a sideline. This is the business. And there at Bukavu Airport is the product. Take a look at that unmarked bag. We had to take these shots surreptitiously. The authorities are very sensitive about cameras here. Understand, the aid organizations don't have enough money to charter food flights to starving villages, but the airport is alive with activity. Are you watching the bag? It's small enough, but too heavy for one man to move alone. There's a clue to be found on a website titled Embassy Network. One posting reads, "How much do you want to offer per kilogram? Please find me at least 100,000 US dollars and I will deliver coltan immediately." You know what this is, but do you have any idea what the connection is between what those men are doing back there and this cell phone? Let me put it this way. If they weren't working, neither would this. They're digging for coltan. There are slivers and shards of it. They look like tiny pieces of slate embedded in that heavy black mud. They use it in cell phones and computers, and last year when Sony couldn't build enough of its PlayStation 2, the price of Congolese coltan skyrocketed, nearly 10 times. It's drifted back down again, but a man can still make more digging and sifting and sluicing for coltan than almost anything else he might do. For more than 100 years, Europe and the United States have been buying and using Congolese products, and yet the Congolese people are still dirt poor. We look at what these various African armies are doing to the Congo. We look at the pillaging of the natural resources and the savagery that's inflicted on the civilians, and we forget, if we ever knew, that it's all part of a system devised in the latter part of the 19th century by King Leopold II of Belgium. He raised an army out here with black soldiers and white officers, paid them little or nothing, but allowed the officers at least to earn a commission on all the ivory and rubber they sent back. It gave them every incentive to work the native population to death, and they did. It was a nasty system then, it still is.
Ideally, when there's an abundance of food, in most societies, people have 3 meals a day. But then as things begin to tighten, they drop down to 2 meals a day. They get really tight, then it's 1 meal a day. And it's survivable, but it's pretty close to the edge. What we're seeing now is in a number of countries that low-income families are planning for foodless days. They cannot afford to buy enough wheat or rice or corn, whatever they're eating, to have even 1 meal a day. So it's just amazing to see that in a country like the Democratic Republic of the Congo or Nigeria or Ethiopia, that a substantial percentage, can be 12 to 20, 24% of the families now plan foodless days. This is really a new step in the tightening of the world food supply. I don't think most political leaders are aware of how tight things are getting for the low-income populations of the world. My goal is to be neither optimistic nor pessimistic, but realistic. We're in a difficult situation. Climate change presents a huge threat to future food security, and I think we should be mobilizing to cut carbon emissions fast. And by fast, I don't mean 80% by 2050. The game will be over long before then. I mean 80% by 2020. And that's going to take almost a World War II type mobilization. But there's a lot at stake now. I mean, in World War II, we were trying to protect a way of life. Now we're trying to protect the future of civilization itself. When we go back and look at archaeological sites of earlier civilizations, like the Sumerians or the Mayans or what have you, in most cases it was food shortages that eventually brought those civilizations down. And I used to think that, for our modern technologically advanced society, food couldn't be the weak link. I now think not only that it could be the weak link, but that it is the weak link.
In fact, the US invented progressive taxes on excessive incomes and fortunes, which averaged 81% at the top between 1932 and 1980. Like inverted mirrors, these graphs show that when tax rates after 1980 plummeted, inequality exploded. We've considered apocalypse now, but what about apocalypse then? Aren't we just trapped in what Raymond Williams long ago called the myth of the happier past? We can ask as he did, is it anything more than a well-known habit of using the past, the good old days, as a stick to beat the present?
Easier, so.
Why don't you tell them about the lead character that you're working on right now?
Well, I don't like to discuss my work.
Well, don't you have to tell them the whole plot? Just the character.
No.
Okay, he works in a nostalgia shop.
What's a nostalgia shop?
Oh, not one of those stores where they sell Shirley Temple dolls and old radios.
Oh, exactly.
I never know who buys that stuff. Who'd want it?
I don't know.
Well, people who live in the past. People who think that their lives would be happier if they lived in an earlier time.
Wow. And just which era would you have preferred to live in, Miniver Chibi?
Paris in the 20s,
Yeah.
in the rain.
Wouldn't
When
have
the
been
rain
bad.
was an acid rain, sorry.
Oh, I see. And no global warming, no TV, and suicide bombing, and nuclear weapons, drug
The
cartels.
usual menu of cliched horror stories.
Well, you know, nostalgia is denial. Denial of the painful present.
Oh, well, Gil is a complete romantic. I mean, he would be more than happy living in a complete state of perpetual denial.
And the name for this fallacy is called Golden Age thinking.
Ah, touche.
Yeah, the erroneous notion that a different time period is better than the one one's living in. You know, it's a flaw in the romantic imagination of those people who find it difficult.
Reading millenarian accounts from the last decades of the 1500s, in which writers believed the end of the world was at hand and the second coming nigh, and saw signs of these earth-shattering occasions in the stars, in nature, and in political events, shouldn't we reflect more critically on our own momentous sense of the times, on our own feeling of being either special or particularly depraved? The classical writer Lucretius wrote, "For the old order always passes, thrust out by the new, and the one has to be made afresh from the other. And so, no less than you, those that went before have passed away, and will continue to."
you do. Yeah, they were all yellow. It's true. Look how they shine for you. Look how they shine for you. Look how they shine. Look at the stars. Look how they shine for you. And all the things that you do.
The historian E.P. Thompson points out, to dismiss millenarian movements as freakish and fanatical is to miss their larger progressive political significance. Eric Hobsbawm likewise recognizes their revolutionary potential, though they are pulled in two directions, toward visions of a new society and nostalgically back to dreams of a pure past, to a lost golden age. But both Hobsbawm and Christopher Hill note the inevitable aching disappointment these movements come to when they have to explain why their prophecies didn't come to pass.
A lot of people are looking up. It's because of a mystery in the sky. Is it a balloon, a UFO? Whatever it is, it sure has a lot of people talking. Eyewitness News reporter Jeff Begay is live in Chelsea, where crowds have gathered. Jeff, what's this all about?
Well, Sade, we don't know, quite honestly. And when I got this assignment, I thought for sure somebody in the newsroom was joking. And it wasn't until we pulled up to this corner and saw the passersby looking up that we realized that, okay, maybe there is something in the sky today.
Oh, snap. Yeah.
You got it? It's a bird, it's a plane, it's,
Maybe Superman, maybe Wonder Woman.
You'd rather it be Wonder Woman?
Yeah.
There is something up there, and there's been a crowd of people at the corner of 8th and 23rd Street trying to figure out exactly what it is. I think I see it now. Right over there.
Right there.
Wait, there's another one over here?
I just see.
I see those two over there.
Earlier today, it was over here.
I think it's a balloon. I don't know.
You think it's a balloon?
Yeah. All right. But then again, balloons don't stand still.
Maybe we're not all just seeing things. The city is reporting that they've been getting calls about this mystery in the sky to their 311 line. So far, they don't have an answer.
What is that?
To that question either. Well, what do you think it is?
I don't know.
You don't want to say it.
I'm looking for the mothership.
Did she find it? Well, still a mystery. We don't know. We did make some calls, and we found out from the FAA that their planes aren't being affected by these white lights. Not that that answers the question. So it remains a mystery. Everybody out here seems to have an opinion on it. I was told that there have been some people out here just standing around looking up for about 45 minutes trying to figure it out. We're live in Chelsea. Jeff Pegues, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Take a look at this video. Is this a UFO? Is this a flying saucer? Roll it, please. A Brooklyn man shot this over the weekend, Rosanna, and he thinks it may be a UFO, actually.
Was he drinking? I don't know. Phil DiPaolo, he was walking his dog around 11 o'clock Monday night when the round flashing object caught his eye. About 10 seconds into the video, a second round bright object flashed across the screen. The sighting has come somewhat similar to other sightings in Williamsburg around the same time last year.
All right, now, Phil DiPaolo, the guy you just wondered, was he drinking? Was he drunk when he made this video?
Phil,
is on the phone.
It's a legitimate question, Phil. Were you drinking that night?
No, I was not. I did have a little coffee earlier in the day, but that's about it.
Okay. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
No, I've lived in Williamsburg since 1979, and that's why it fascinated me, because I've never seen anything like it before.
Okay, Phil, before we attack your credibility, we want to find out a little bit about you. What do you do, sir?
I run a citywide civic organization called the New York Community Council. We do advocacy work throughout the 5 boroughs.
And, all right. We don't see any buildings in the video. So it was high up in the sky?
Yeah, it was high up in the sky. What happened,
there's a building.
I was in my yard after I brought my dogs in, and I looked, and I seen this thing as I was walking, so I went and got my camera, because I don't have binoculars, and my camera has a good zoom, and it does HD video. And when I zoomed in, and I said, I don't know what this is. Let me hit the video function on my camera and tape a little of it, and I can send it to some people, and maybe they can give me some answers as to what it is.
Did you get nervous, Phil?
No, actually, it was quite beautiful. That's why I was kind of fascinated by it, because even with the naked eye, you could see it sort of strobing and changing colors. I mean, some of the movement you see in the video is me sort of moving the camera around, but it was fascinating because, again, there was a lot of stars out. It was a very clear night.
Phil,
and,
it could be a helicopter. I mean,
right? A lot of things.
Could be a helicopter. Did you hear any noise?
No, that was the other thing. It was silent. And the other odd thing was, after I filmed it, I ran into my house to, upload it to my computer so I could look at it on the screen. And after I saw the second object, which kind of freaked me out even more because I wasn't really looking at that at all. That just came up in the video.
Phil, did you, we may be the same age. Do you remember the Brady Bunch episode where Greg Brady shined the flashlight on the sheet? Do you remember that one?
I recall the Brady Bunch, but I wasn't much of a fan of that.
Well, they pulled a big prank on Bobby, and it looks like they used the same exact technique.
He's not. Have you gotten any answers, Phil? I mean, because that's the bottom line. Anybody helping you with this?
That's the bottom. The reason I finally put it up on YouTube was I figured maybe somebody with some knowledge could tell me it was a.
Hey, you came to the wrong place, Phil.
Sorry.
We have no idea what this is.
Well, maybe you could tell. I don't know. Hopefully, someone will post something on YouTube with a rational explanation. I don't believe it's a flying saucer, but it's something, You know
what? We have a huge audience all the way to Staten Island. You never know who's going to see it this morning and call us and say they have an explanation for this.
Right, and the other odd thing was when I went back outside, I said, let me try to film it again. It was gone. And that's what really fascinated me, because I figured if it was a satellite or a star...
It's gone, just as suddenly as it appered.
It was
Phil,
gone.
It was gone.
We're going to get to the bottom of this, and we'll get back to you.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Empty words. Phil, nice to talk to you.
Thanks,
very nice.
You have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too.
On the 12th of December 2008, Share International Foundation distributed a news release announcing that in the very near future, a large bright star would appear in the sky, visible throughout the world, night and day.
Finny, this is the strangest thing. Look. Look at it. Just look at it.
Wow! No fucking way.
Yeah, and it burst. I got bursts of...
That is mad. What is it?
I don't know.
How did you get to zoom in that far?
And I haven't even zoomed in all the way. It's
Zoom in
changing.
more.
It's changing shape and colour.
Oh, can I get a picture?
Look at. I'm not touching the zoom now, and it's moving away. Look at it. Look at it. It's moving.
Yeah, I believe you. I want to get a picture.
Jesus. Look at that.
UFO sightings may be the stuff of films and TV shows, but they keep turning up and causing controversy. This was filmed in Shropshire in February. The object was seen apparently hovering above Shrewsbury for some time. Harriet Rogers filmed this footage with her father. You definitely think it was a UFO?
Yes. It's come back. It has definitely come back in the same pace, literally every starry night.
Edivaldo, noites de domingo e objeto voador não identificado chamou a atenção de moradores do conjunto universitário. Há mais de 2 horas, esse objeto que apresenta cor vermelha e azul está aqui na órbita próximo ao conjunto universitário. Os moradores não têm ideia do que é. Você está vendo agora pelas imagens do Jailson Fernandes que há uma diferença das estrelas e desse objeto.
Cuando vi una luz muy grande, muy resplandeciente, que no es normal verla en el cielo, no era fácil decir que era una estrella o un avión. Inmediatamente, aprovechando que tenemos cámaras de buena resolución, traté de grabar cuando en el acercamiento se puede ver que es un objeto completamente extraño. En el momento en el que él ya se está alejando, él empieza a girar a su entorno, y cuando se empieza a desplazar como ya para irse, se nota perfectamente que es una nave.
The Lord Maitreya is awaited by Christians as the Christ, although they don't know it, is awaited by Hindus as Krishna, although they don't know it, is awaited by Jews as the Messiah, although they don't know it, is awaited by Muslims as the Imam Mahdi, although they don't know it, and awaited by Buddhists who have his name right, as Maitreya Buddha, foretold to come now by the previous Buddha, Gautama Buddha, who said at this time would come into the world a great teacher, a Buddha like himself, who from his great spiritual stature would stimulate and galvanize, inspire humanity to create a brilliant golden civilization based, as he put it, on righteousness and truth.
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'll blow our mind. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He told us not to blow it.
Over here, up there, I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river. It wasn't a helicopter, it wasn't a balloon, and it was so near.
And it looked what, sort of round, white, luminescent, and silent?
Silent, and it looked dark, like black or grey in the middle, and had white lights, just looked like light bulbs, you know? Just going off, on, blink, 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 round the bottom, and on top was a red light.
The history of imagining contact with alien life goes back quite far. Emanuel Swedenborg famously claimed extensive communications with humans on other planets. Benjamin Creme's information is premised on the esoteric doctrine of avatars. We will come to his version of this doctrine in a moment, but let's first do a brief survey of a tradition of which Creme claims to be the latest expression. The Russian spiritualist Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who founded the Theosophical Society in 1875, claimed to have lived among enlightened adepts or masters in her remote travels throughout the East, and endeavored to transmit their wisdom and teachings to the masses in occult tomes such as Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. Although Blavatsky was a charismatic and controversial figure denounced by detractors as a fraud and impostor, Theosophy held wide appeal to intellectual and bourgeois classes as an alternative spiritual path that did not require belief in an anthropomorphized God, and which insisted on its own rationality and scientific foundation. Moreover, the politics of Theosophy, some have argued, were progressive, anti-colonial, proto-feminist, and socialist. Theosophy sought to extend reason into what might be dismissed as irrational and mystical domains, but also to critique the blindness and contradictions of Western secularism and the limitations and failings of post-Enlightenment modernity. Although Blavatsky was dismissed in the 1880s as a charlatan and ingenious impostor by an investigator of the Society for Psychical Research, a more recent investigation of the report by the same Society for Psychical Research, issued in 1986, acknowledged the original report itself was flawed and untrustworthy, full of serious procedural errors that rendered its conclusions null and void. Benjamin Creme fashions himself as the latest carrier of the tradition Blavatsky launched, but there are many other notable figures, mostly women, who claim to write books of occult teachings dictated by enlightened esoteric masters. These writers offered critiques of the materialism and enthrallment of post-Enlightenment modernity, and incorporated messianic and apocalyptic strains in their philosophies. The story of Jiddu Krishnamurti might give rise to a farcical feeling of déjà vu in considering Benjamin Creme.
I maintain that truth is a pathless land and cannot be approached by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. Truth being limitless, unconditioned, unapproachable by any path whatsoever, cannot be organized, nor should any organization be formed to lead or coerce people along any particular path. First, understanding that, then you will see how impossible it is to organize a belief being purely an individual matter. You cannot, and therefore must not organize it. If you do, it becomes crystallized, dead. It becomes a creed, a sect, a religion to be imposed on others. That is what everyone throughout the world is attempting to do. Truth is narrowed down and made a plaything for those who are weak, for those who are only momentarily discontented. Truth cannot be brought down. Rather, the individual must make the effort to ascend to it. You cannot bring the mountaintop to the valley. If you would attain to the mountaintop, you must pass through the valley, climb the steeps, unafraid of the dangerous precipices. Organizations cannot make you free or develop the inner man. No man from outside can make you free. Nor can organized worship, nor the immolation of yourself for a cause make you free. Therefore, I am not concerning myself with the founding of religions or new sects or the establishment of new theories or new philosophies.
Look, sir, if I want to understand something new, I must look at it with clear eyes.
Yes.
I can't bring the past with all the recognition process, with all the memories, and then translate what I see as new. Surely, sir, just a minute. The man who invented the jet must have forgotten or be completely familiar with the propeller piston.
Right.
And then there was an absence of knowledge in which he discovered the new.
That's fine.
Wait, no, not a question. That's fine. That's the only way to operate in life.
Yes.
That is, I must be completely aware there must be complete awareness of the past.
Yes.
An absence of the past to see the new.
All right.
Or to come upon the new.
All right.
Not you're conceding reluctantly. That's not.
I'm conceding reluctantly because I think I see what you're saying, and I think I agree with the point that you're making. But it's also true that one operates in terms of
the past.
Symbols that
Of the
one
past.
has, and you can't. It's not as though we begin de novo.
No, de novo
like
is not
tabula
possible.
rasa.
But we have to begin de novo because the life demands it. Because we have lived in this way, accepting war, hatred, brutality, competition, and anxiety, guilt. All that we have accepted that. We live that way. And I am saying, to bring about a different quality, a different way of living, the past must disappear.
We must be open to the new.
Therefore,
Absolutely.
the past must have no meaning.
That I can't go along with.
That is what the whole world is objective. The established order says, I can't let go for the new to be. And the young people all throughout the world say, let's revolt against the old. But they don't understand the whole complications of it. Because they say, but what have you given us? Except examinations, job, and the repetition of the old pattern. War and favorite wars, wars.
Well, you're pointing out, it seems to me, the importance of not being slaves to the past. And that's so true, and I don't want to in any way...
Past being the tradition, past being the pattern of morality, which is the social morality, which is not moral.
But at the same time, there's only one generation, namely ourselves, that separates the future generation from the caveman. And what
I agree.
were to be totally rescinded, then we would start right back.
No. To break through the past demands great deal of intelligence, a great deal of sensitivity to the past.
Yeah,
you can't just break away from it.
Okay, I'm content. That's right.
All right. So, the problem really, sir, is, can we live a different way?
Here. Right.
A different way in which there are no wars, no hatreds, in which man loves man, without competition, without division. We say you are a Christian, you are a Catholic, you are a Protestant, you are this. That's also immature. There's no meaning.
Well,
it's an intellectual, sophisticated division. And that's not a religious mind at all. That's not religion. A religious mind is a mind that has no hatred, that lives completely without fear, without anxiety, in which there is not a particle of antagonism. Therefore, that a mind that loves, that's a different dimension of living altogether. And nobody wants that.
And in another sense, everybody wants sex.
But they won't go after it.
They won't go after
And of course, they're distracted by so many other things. They're so heavily conditioned by their past, they hold on to it.
Well, I think there's some who will go after
There are
it.
very few.
The numbers doesn't
The
matter.
minority,
How many?
so which the minority is always the most important.
However alien to standard Christian theology, Theosophy's notion of the Christ as an office rather than a personal name, and the disciple or vehicle in the world being anointed or overshadowed by the divine office holder, has some basis in tradition. One way to understand this version of the Christ is through the medieval legal doctrine of the king's two bodies, the body natural and the corpus mysticum, or mystical body.
Curiouser and curiouser.
Friedrich Nietzsche famously wrote of a madman who ran into the marketplace shouting that we have killed God, and asks, "How did we do this? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us?"
And they put a tape recorder, huge thing, on the table in front of him. There was no talk or conversation. He didn't speak to anybody. He just sat there. I guess he does yoga. He was so still. And he has a very good, fit body. After he'd sat on his high chair in total silence, and there were people in the audience with their eyes shut, and everybody was meditating, one of the little women who were running about doing things switched on the tape recorder. And we heard this kind of voice say, "I, Maitreya, I love you," type thing.
What happened after he stopped doing this?
Benjamin Creme then did a very good thing. He said, "How many of you are here for the first time?" And fun enough, we all put up our hands, and we were over 50% there for the first time. So he said, "I'm going to tell you all about the ancients, the hierarchy of the masters of wisdom, about many things, and those of you who have been here before, please be tolerant." He then talked, and I found him much more impressive.
Hello, my name's Frederick Rowe. I'm a writer on lesbian and gay history. I went along to the meeting partly to provide moral support and partly to provide an insight into meditation. I thought it'd be good company, and I was quite interested in the little I'd heard about Benjamin Creme's meetings. While I was sitting listening to the tape recording, which was played right at the beginning of the meeting, a not too well recorded message, I thought, hello, is there a subliminal message underneath this? It was wonderfully relaxing. The quality of voice was superb. Beautiful voice and positive, pleasant statements.
I am the Prince of Peace. I am the sword bearer. I am in your hearts as love. I am your friend and guide. I am the lawgiver. I call you as helpers. I take you by the hand to the source. I shall live among you.
And during this, which went on for 40 minutes, Benjamin Creme's head, which was looking in the middle distance, moved like a satellite dish, very gradually, and he timed it exactly for this 40 minutes of, to me, utter monosyllabic rubbish.
You see me at my lectures for could be up to half an hour before the lecture begins. I'm overshadowed by Maitreya, and he looks at the audience through me. I feel my eyes are like television sets, you know, they're pulled sideways and top and bottom like that, so I'm sort of looking like that.
It was a roasting 95 degrees in London, which we hadn't had in years. And when Creme started, he said, "I don't care how many of you are skeptical about what I do, but I have come on this night in this steam bath because I believe in what I am doing."
I thought the summary of the approach of the Maitreya, the message, share and save the world, was wonderful. I mean, a great slogan, very simply worded, no kind of esoteric language or to be an adept or an initiate or anything. A very sort of practical philosophy, and that's great for me. In that it included ecology, included a sort of fairer economic system, a political view that was small s socialist, and recognized the sort of sense of the uniqueness of the individual, but also the kind of collective energies. I'm quite keen on the holistic approach. But when he started trying to bring in fairies, or explaining Atlantis, or sacred planets, space brothers, the Buddha hovering over crystal bowls in the Himalayas, that I found very, very weird. It was like he was trying to be, or the Maitreyan approach was trying to be all things to all people. But this, to me, it was very much like a bargain basement, or maybe even an upmarket bazaar of beliefs. And it was fascinating in the way that bazaars are fascinating, that there's so much to see, so many richnesses, but it became a little gaudy.
Throughout the world, there are men, women, and little children who have not even the essentials to stay alive. They crowd the cities of many of the poorest countries in the world. This crime fills me with shame. My brothers, how can you watch these people die before your eyes and call yourselves men? My plan is to save these my little ones from certain starvation and needless death. My plan is to show you that the way out of your problems is to listen again to the true voice of God within your hearts. To share
approaches of this most bountiful of worlds among your brothers and sisters everywhere. Man is an emerging God, and thus requires the formation of modes of living which will allow this God to flourish. How can you be content with the modes within which you now live? When millions starve and die in squalor, when the rich parade their wealth before the poor, when each man is his neighbor's enemy, when no man trusts his brother, for how long must you live thus, my friends? For how long can you support this degradation?
Mr. Patel is no public speaker. His manner is gentle, his voice usually quiet. His words are not earth-shattering, although his metaphors are charming. We are all children, he says, playing in the lap of a benign mother who smiles at our little games. His eyes sparkle. He smiles and laughs from time to time. But something did happen that startled me. Have you ever seen a face in the clouds? You watch it float past, and it somehow changes into another form? Well, since I couldn't write or record for the first 3 hours, I was free not only to listen, but to observe. And I was intrigued to see that from time to time, Rajnikant Patel's face would change. The eyes were the same, the expression unchanged, and yet this man, in his late 40s, the odd strand of silver in his dark hair, well, it was like that cloud. His cheekbones became more prominent. He looked ancient. Then, as if one had taken a watercolor brush and applied a wash over his face, he was a teenage boy. Like sand, his face shifted from old to young to his present age and back. At one point, I wondered if perhaps Patel was Maitreya. He said not. And that is how I experienced Rajnikant Patel.
I say to myself that I'll be happiest when I'm gone from this world. That is my home. That is where I belong to. Outside creation. Where I came from. That is my real place, which I experience when I'm with the Master. But when I'm in creation, this is my temporary house. That means I don't expect what I see in my other house to be in this world. You see? But many times I say, if I tell this thing to my wife, they might think that, oh, I'm thinking of going away now. Because many times they see that I'm
Many times they've seen my body lying around, but I'm not there. So they might think that I may not come back, that's why. I'm a little bit frightened, but in my heart of hearts, many times I have said to myself, I will be happy if I am in my other house.
What is your experience of Maitreya when you were with him? What does he appear like to you? What does he look like? What is his tone of voice?
Maitreya is a cosmic form. He can appear like a snake. He can come like a zebra. Sometimes he comes as a human being and an old man. He has made me experience that he is everything. And this is what goes for everyone. He's everywhere, all the time. Without him, as he said, there is no creation. Therefore, if anybody thinks that, oh, Maitreya lives in one corner, he doesn't live in another corner, that is a mistaken notion. But as far as I'm concerned, yes, I joke with him, laugh with him, sometimes I'm tempted to rebuke him if things don't go right.
And do you?
Yes, sometimes I give it up even. But then after 2-3 days, I do the thing what I was asked to do.
Is Maitreya for you tall and thin? Does he have a beard? Is he beautiful? Is he like...
Maitreya is both very, very extraordinary, beautiful, beyond human description. Sometimes he comes like a saint. Sometimes he comes like an old man with a beard. Sometimes he comes like a crying person. But on the other side, he can also come frightening you. And it has happened to me twice. Once it was in the form of a snake. And I was so frightened that I thought that is the end of the world. And there he materialized in the form of a beautiful woman.
You told me that you walked in the door and he just the stair there. He was standing on the stair. When was that first experience of him physically?
Physically, I saw him in 1982 on the doorstep when I was tested, whether I'm a businessman or I'm looking for whether I'm a businessman or selling my mission. And I had to choose between the two. If I were to choose business, I would have been laughing. But I had to choose a mission, so that was my testing time.
Tell me what your mission is as you see it.
My mission is to free one and all from the bondages of life. And Master says, even when you merge within me, your identity remains sacred.
Rajnikant Patel. Mr. Patel and Mr. Creme had never met, oddly enough, though it's from Mr. Patel that all of Maitreya's predictions ultimately come.
My theory, I can't prove this, but my theory is that he is very, very close to Maitreya. Maitreya uses him. Maitreya overshadows him in a certain way. He uses him because he is a medium. Mr. Patel is a medium. Maitreya enters into him and can speak through him. And very often when Patel is speaking to people, it is Maitreya speaking to them through Mr. Patel. And that's his function. And that's how he's close. But that doesn't give him any real understanding of what Maitreya is about. I believe he has no understanding at all of the consciousness or the purpose or the validity even of the being of Maitreya.
I started by asking whether Benjamin Creme was more like John the Baptist or John Mandeville, but I will end by proposing a third possibility, the deluded and hopelessly outdated Don Quixote de la Mancha, who turns his back on our tarnished, tattered, and pitiful world, embracing instead imagination as sovereign, and who attempts to give back to the world something it has lost, something it doesn't even know it has lost, who tries to re-enchant the world. In the view of Horkheimer and Adorno, man's assertion of sovereignty over nature radiates disaster triumphant. Francis Bacon's seamen and discoverers who cannot sail to the secrets of knowledge and the quest to command nature bring us full circle to Benjamin Creme's Sea Discoverer. The discoverer confidently poses in front of a map, ironically depicting a mare perpetuo, or perpetual sea, and thus we see him as a counterpart to Walter Benjamin's Angelus Novus, the angel of history before the catastrophe of human events hurled at his feet, driven backward into the future. Benjamin Creme's hallucinations of the future thus remain empty and hollow. Then again, his madness pales in the face of that of our own modern world. already a brutal everyday disaster for so many.
I was really struck by the way the world has changed so fast, and I thought that if I didn't write about the way things were when I was a girl, that no one would ever know that there had been, or that there was this different way of being. And I thought about the old folks and how they were and how they lived, and I realized that if I didn't write something down about it, that it would just be it would just go away or be forgotten. And I wanted the younger generations to know that there were different ways of living and being in the world other than what we see around us today.
How have the landscapes that you know changed over the past few decades, and what's driving those changes?
What's driving those changes is greed, and the landscapes have changed in shocking ways, heartbreaking ways. And the way I was raised, and the way a lot of the people in the Southwest were raised, we related to the land as extensions of ourselves. In the years since I've moved to Tucson, it's shocking the way they just crush the 200-year-old saguaro cactuses, the way all kinds of beautiful living things are just crushed. These foothill palo verdes, they get the beautiful yellow blossoms in the spring. It takes them hundreds of years to grow, and these people come and they have no understanding. They're just driven by greed to build these badly built houses, which they then sell to people with bad mortgages. And well, we know how that all ends out now.